Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Barbados Genealogy Group's meeting for September. This is our penultimate meeting for 2019. I see a number of new faces in the group, so I just want to introduce myself. My name is Harriet Pierce. I'm the librarian here at the museum and also the facilitator for this group. The group has been in existence now since 2014. We actually were launched on the 20th of March 2014. And since then, we have developed a program of presentations like this one. Each year we have an open session like this. And the other sessions, we have speakers who tell us about their family research or speak on different aspects of historical research. We also have bus tours, we have a newsletter, we have a workshop. We actually have one workshop coming up on Saturday. It is fully subscribed. If you have not signed up as yet, you are too late. But you will let us know if you're interested in another one. So we try to provide a myriad of activities to support family research. And this evening, we have a number of persons, all members or supporters of the group, who are going to be updating us on their family research. But before we get there, we'll want to do a number of housekeeping matters. As I mentioned, we have a bus tour coming up on the 23rd of November. Pat is usually the person who starts the planning process. I'm not sure if he has anything to tell us today. But what I can tell you, the bus tour is going to concentrate on Christchurch and the southern part of St. Michael. So if you have any family connections in those areas you wish us to include in the tour, just let us know early. So that's the 23rd of November. We will let you know as details come to hand. The other thing is we have our latest edition of our Connections newsletter, hot off the press. And we will have our editor, Nicholas Mears. Nicholas, where are you? Oh, Nicholas will just come and tell us a bit about the new Connections.
Good evening to everyone. As was mentioned, our latest edition of Connections is out this September, and there are a number of interesting articles which you can find within this newsletter. In the Connections newsletter, you will find information pertaining to Vision 2020 regathering. And as you know, this is an initiative that was launched or is supposed to be launched next year. So you would find what it is about and how it can be used for genealogical research. Also within this edition, we have an article pertaining to Bajan Garveyites. With the last edition, which was in May, it mentioned Barbadians who were involved in the Universal Negro Improvement Association here in Barbados. This edition looks at those Barbadians who were involved within that organization in the United States and also in Central America. You will also find information pertaining to prominent Bajan surnames. So therefore, if you want to find out what were the surnames of the who's who in society, you can read and find out what those surnames were. There's also the activities of the Barbados Genealogy Group. We had two group meetings, one in May, which was presented by Ms. Marcia Nurse, and one in July that was presented by Linda Bowen. So therefore you can read reviews about those two group meetings. Also you can read about our bus tour that was held on Saturday the 15th of June. There are a number of interesting pictures that you can find and also articles that were written, so you can read about that. And also you can read about the Barbados Genealogy Group's involvement in Fisherman's Day that was held on June 29th, And also, we had a visit of a queen here at the museum. So therefore, find out who that queen, who the queen was that visited the museum in June of this year. We also have two interesting articles that were submitted, one by Dr. Patricia Stafford, and it looked at using the slave registers. So she gave a background of the slave registers. And also, Natasha Bino, she wrote an article, The African Narrative of the Transatlantic Slave Trade, and you can read about the ethnic societies that were affected by the transatlantic slave trade and how persons were captured and transported to be sold into slavery. And finally, the final article looks at nicknames. Sometimes when you're doing your genealogical research, you find nicknames instead of the person's given name. Let's say, for example, you might find records of someone named Peggy, but she might have been baptized and given her official name Margaret. So Peggy is a nickname for Margaret. So therefore, you can find out about the various nicknames that were used by our foreparents, and also you can find the upcoming events. So grab a copy of Connections newsletter. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. As usual, Nicholas did a fantastic job. I have a few copies printed, but the newsletter will be circulated electronically as usual. And I want to encourage persons here, some of your friends, if you wish to submit an article, we welcome your submissions. The article should be short, about 250 to 300 words, and preferably with some images to illustrate, because we want to make the newsletter attractive. And the next newsletter is due in January of 2020. So think about ideas for submission and make contact with me. Okay, our next session will basically be the meat of the matter this evening. We have three presenters, and Dr. Stafford, Patricia Stafford, will be moderating our open session. So just call on Pat to come to the podium.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Even though it's so hot and we haven't got any fans, I'm sure we'll have a really interesting evening, because we've got an interesting programme here. We've got three speakers from different backgrounds, and we have Sabir Nakumbo, who comes from an Indian background. We have Tom St. John, who is actually going to talk about how his Barbadian family relates to another Barbadian family. You'll find out more about that later. And then, of course, we have Marcia Nurse, who always tells us some interesting information about the family research she's been undertaking for quite a long time. Before I introduce Sabir, I better say that the bus tour on the 23rd in November is we don't quite know where we're going yet. We do know we're going along the south coast of Christchurch, and instead of Trevor Marshall, who usually helps us, this time we have a different presenter, a different sort of head of information, Frederick Allen, who is a native of that area, so he seems a pretty good choice. And the only thing we wanted to do now, before we can put out a more detailed agenda, is find somewhere as to where we're going to eat. So we will come back to you on that one as soon as we have some information. But anybody with Christchurch connections, the sooner we get to know about them, the better, and then we can make sure that they're integrated in part of the route. Okay? The other thing is, there's a lady, actually, she's just disappeared with Maurice Greenwich, but I invited her to come this evening because she's not living in Barbados, but she's come to find some relatives here. and she is looking for the people who used to own the Lone Star Garage and the Leeward Bus Company. So I feel there's maybe some people in the audience who do know quite a bit about these people. When she's finished talking tomorrow, hopefully she'll come back and join us. And anybody in the meantime, anybody who feels that they may be able to help her with her search, tell me, tell her if she's around, tell Harriet, whatever, and we'll get the message to her. Right, okay, tonight's agenda. First of all, Sabir, would you like to come forward, please? Thank you. Everybody is going to be allocated 15 minutes, and I've been told to be very severe. So at some stage I might just pull that up. Yes, okay. But I'm sure you're going to tell us something really interesting, and I will now pass the podium over to yourself. Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Doctor. Before I start, I just heard the gentleman talking about nicknames. So I thought, let me say a few words on the nicknames. Among the East Indians in Barbados, and East Indians in India too, many of their surnames come from the trade that they do. So for example, I am a Nakuda, and it's a Persian word. It comes from Nawahud, because my ancestors were captain of the sea. Nawahud in Persian means the captain of the ship, or the lord of the ship. And so therefore, my ancestors were all set off from Bandri Abbas, somewhere in Iran, and they would transport people and goods to India, and then the other parts of Asia. And some of these ancestors of mine would have then decided to move inward into the place called Gujarat, because between Surat and Randir is a port in Surat, which was very, very famous a few hundred years ago. And so that's how my ancestors came to a village called Tatkeshwar. Even in Barbados, I'm sure you would have heard Suleiman Bulbulia. His parents came from Kaflita, is a village in Gujarat, and because they used to keep a bird called Bulbul, and the bird Bulbul was one who used to have melodious voice. And then he would have names like Mochi, which means a shoemaker. And so East Indians would get a lot of their surnames from the trade that they do. So this is just a little, start off. I came to Barbados when I was about 10 years old, in 1958 from India, in a village called Tatkeshwar in Gujarat. And my brother and I, we were the only two grandchildren my grandparents had. And when I was like around 7, 8, maybe 9 years old, because he had lots of cattle and buffaloes, and we had a lot of land, and they would grow so many different crops, cotton and wheat and sugarcane and rice. So they would have like a farmer's market where they would sell wholesale to those people who would buy and then keep it for a year. So they would buy a lot of rice and keep it for a whole year. They would buy the commodities, and then they would keep it for a whole year, and it would be cheaper for them. So as I was my granddad's favorite, he would take me. Can I just move this a little bit? I would go with him, like we would wake up in the morning very, very early, and it might take maybe 2 or 3 hours to get to the destination. And while riding the buffalo cart, he would tell me a lot of stories. He would tell me about himself. He would tell me about how he got married to my grandmom. And he would tell me about his father. And then he would tell me about his grandfather, which would be my great-great-grandfather. And of course, being 8, 9 years old, I do not want to profess that I remember everything. I may have remembered some of the stuff. And I think that may have been the catalyst or that have sparked that interest of wanting to know about my family. And of course, I came to Barbados at the age of 10, went to school at Wesley Hall, went to colleges, I went to work, fell in love, got married, got divorced. That's part of life. They say that it is better to love and lost than never to have loved at all. So maybe that could be the case. So eventually then, after a few years, I got married again to my first cousin, who's my wife now, my first cousin. And so while I was away, let's say for 20 and 30 years, I was very, very fortunate that she filled that gap for me. How did my grandfather pass away? How did my grandmother pass away? What happened to my uncles, to my aunts? How many cousins I had? So that also again created that interest to want to know more about my family. And I was so lucky, or I am so lucky, that my wife also loved to know about her family too. And it's our family because remember, she's my first cousin. So her uncle is my uncle and her aunt is my aunt. And so I learned a lot, and thank God, because of that interest that we have had, want to know about my family, so interested. And they're not everybody who are really interested to know about their families. As you would know, even within families, there may only be one or two individuals who is very interested in knowing about the family. So we have traveled, thank God, all over the world, wherever our families are residing, whether it's Reunion or whether it's Pakistan or Africa, wherever. So I'm blessed when it comes to that. So at this point in time, I can say that I know every member of my family wherever they are in the world. And I keep in touch with them, and now the communication is much better than it was before. But what I have noticed, I know everybody is always interested and going to learn about who married to whom, and going into archives. I want to know the names and all. But for me, knowing about the family is not just knowing who my uncle married to or who my aunt married to, but I like to know about the characteristics of that individual. Something special that I would like to know, so that I can put it in my memoir, I can put it, in my book, or I will make a note of it. Because I think that is what stands out when you are talking about your family and you're talking about knowing about your family. For example, I have an aunt who passed away about 3 years ago. She was 90 years old. She used to live in Canada, and I would go with my voice recorder, and I would tape her over and over again. But every time I go, one of her specialities or her characteristics that I can remember is that I would go by my sister, and she had 3 kids, so we would drop the kids to school, and she would then go and she would come to drop her grandchildren to school too. And then when we see her, we would pretend we are hiding from her. And then she would say, she would run to her, I see you, and then she would come and hug me up and start kissing you. And you would see all the saliva all over your face and thing, And for us, it was fun. And actually, I am so happy, I am so fortunate that she did that, because this is a means of remembering her. So these are what we call memories. And I think that each and every one of us, should leave memories. Memories are very, very important. One of the things about, doing the research and so on, is that you should always have that interest, you should always have that love to want to know. And go and visit your grandparents, visit your mother, and learn more and more about your family history. And then if they are not around, then go and visit the neighbors. And I'm sure that neighbors who may be of the same age as your grandparents were, they may have so many things to tell you. What I used to do with my aunt, that after I hear what she tells me, and every time I go, I would record her. And I travel a lot. I go to India a lot to do my own research otherwise. And then I would go to the elders in the village on our street, someone with 92 years old, and I would ask the same question I asked my aunt. So corroborate, because old people or seniors, they tend to sometimes, I'm a senior too because I'm over 70 years old. They tend to forget, or they may add something they would have forgotten the last time, or they will forget what they would have told you the last time. And so when you have someone else, if you're fortunate enough to find the person, then later on when you get time, then you will be able to corroborate and say, yeah, I think this is the one that I should keep. This one may not be sure. So that is the kind of thing that I do. I am always in the habit of walking with my voice recorder, walking with my camera recorder, because I think that every opportunity that one should have, one should try and videotape, record, and always go and visit older heads. And I think that they have so many information to tell you. I know people go into the archives and so on, but I think that apart from going to the archives, I think that it is also very important that you speak to your neighbors and continue to speak to your neighbors and your families. And one of the things that they talk about leaving the memories, and I got emotional, is that we should leave memories with our children. We should leave memories with our grandchildren, so that when we pass away, that they would be able to remember certain aspects of it, some characteristics of us. We need to do something for our family. And I continue doing this thing, and I do I research on my family up to today. But what that has led me to is that while working at the Advocate, I would go in the Advocate library, and because I wanted to know how did the East Indians come to Barbados, and I would have learned a lot about the East Indians coming to Trinidad and Guyana and Suriname and other parts of the Caribbean as indentured laborers. But I wanted to, and of course it has been documented. But about the East Indian in Barbados, there were only one or two interviews in the 1940s, those who came in the 40s and so on. But being inquisitive-minded, I thought it had to be more than that. And so I went around with my tape recorder in those days, to speak to all the older heads, East Indian heads, and I started to tape them. Remember, because for me, I'm accustomed to doing these things now, and then they would tell me, of course they would interview me first. They would say, oh, how many kids you got, and I would say, well, I have so much. And then they would say, oh, what is your son? And I would say, well, my son is about 18 years old. And they would say, oh, well, get him married, And they would tell me about themselves. Oh, when I was 15, I got married, and on and on, So fascinating stories. So eventually then I would go all over Shocky Mount and all over Barbados to learn more about who were the East Indians, or what were your relationship with the East Indians, or what you call the Coolie Man at that time. And then I learned more and more, and then I got to a stage where I learned that the first East Indian came from Bengal. A lady gave me, remember airmail? Airmail in these days, it was what? It's aeromail or something, what you call it. So that's all I had, the address at the back of it. Some places, a village in Bengal. So in 2000, my wife and I went, and we spent about 6 weeks going to various villages, and I found the village. I found the first person, his name was Bashat Ali. What I'm saying is that because of my love for wanting to know, right, and I was not afraid to interview people, that I went to this stage now. And then, of course, I wrote a book called Bengal to Barbados, 100-year history of East Indians in Barbados. But this led me to write this book. One of the fortunate things about me too, that I am multilingual, so I had no problem speaking to the older heads in Bengal, in Pakistan, and India, in Gujarat, and so on. So that was the advantage I had. And now, presently, I have just finished a second book. Hopefully, I will send it to print next week, and it should be published within the next 2 weeks, within the next 2 months, called Muslims of CARICOM. Again, I did some research, and I learned that people do not talk about the Muslims, African Muslims. And I learned that 180 years prior to Columbus, there was a man called Mansa Musa Abu Bakr, who came to the Caribbean in 1312, 180 years before Columbus got lost. And so that was the first phase of exploration of the African people coming to the Caribbean. The second phase was, of course, among the slaves, right, that were brought to the Caribbean, they were Muslims. And 12 out of 15 Caribbean countries, they were slaves. And most of them were the leaders of the Maroon. A lot of them were fighting for the freedom and justice and fighting against oppression and tyranny. For example, in Haiti, it was not Duvalier that started the revolution. It was people like Macanda and people like Boukman, and they're the ones who started the revolution in 1751 and 1791. And so these are the stages that I have reached because of having a talk with my grandfather at the age of 8 and 9, and my wife filling me in, and I know what happened. So that love for wanting to know more, I don't know if being malicious or inquisitive, whatever word you want to use. So this is the stage I am in now. And maybe I don't know what I will do after my second book. But you can go further. You don't have to wait until you can say, oh, I did my family history and that's it, chill out. No, do things. Find, what about those vendors that are selling potatoes on the wayside? I would like to do some work on the centurions in Barbados. I would like to do some work on the snow cone people. And there's so many things you could do. You could continue your research, not just do what you're doing for your family and so on, but I think that we can play a leading role in educating and enlightening Barbadian people. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Tobias. That was really interesting. I think it's probably thrown up several questions, but what we're going to do, we're going to hear all the three speakers, and then please, if at that point, you'll be able to answer any questions which I'm sure people want to put to you, including, no doubt, the title of your new book that we might be wanting to buy as well. So thank you for that. And the next speaker is Tom St. John, who has been researching more of the information that I think it was about 2 years ago you presented to us before. So we want to know more, because obviously another person who was curious and asked everybody. And so please, I'll just say, I think everybody knows you. Please come forward, and I think you're going to have something on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So I need somebody who works working your screen.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Stafford.
Who's working your screen?
I think I use it myself.
Oh, that's
I hope
right.
it works.
Okay.
All right. Okay, thank you for listening to my presentation. Hopefully, it can be short in 15 minutes. All right. So let's go to the first slide and see if it works. No, hurry up. First one. Okay. All right. I kind of put the summary first. Everybody's always worrying about what you're going to talk about. And it's always long-winded when you get into the details and you forget what you really wanted to do. But we all are, for me, I'm an amateur person in the field of genealogy. But it is what my family told me about all the stories, like our previous speaker, that got me most interested in it. And so hence I continue to visit. Now, I want to talk about a few details. I call it the devil in the details, and I make connections or nodes that I was interested in finding out. This extends not only from your paper trail that you create, but your DNA side of it. And what I intend to do is to show you two aspects of it. Now, the first one is the devil in the details and how I managed to organize some of these facets. Now, let me continue on here if this thing works. She's pointing. Oh, there we go. No, that one is backwards. Okay, here you go. Hopefully you can read this, the devil in the details. I want to acknowledge up front, there's a lady in here Joan Bradford, who's been with our group for a few years. And we had talked on, and we were trying to figure out how the Bradfords and the St. John's were connected. Why? Because just like everybody else, you start tracking down people, and all of a sudden I had this woman, Mary Elizabeth Bradford. She's a Bradford. I got a Bradford in my family. Where is the connection? And not only that, I lived it. As a young man, I lived in St. Lucie with my aunt at the post office, St. Lucie's post office. And guess what? Bradfords are all around me. I played with them. If they're not at Bentham's, they were in Bentham's. My father, on a recurring basis, would take me down to St. Andrew, and I would be at the Bradfords at Baxter's. We were picking fat porks and cashews up in the hills in St. Andrew. And this thing went on. Our families were intertwined and interconnected. So it behooved me to find out what was going on with the Bradfords. Not only that, my uncle was married to a Bradford, Uncle Kenneth. So what gives, right? So in my research, we find out that Charles Henry, and by the way, I do have an acknowledgement up there about Joan is here with her family. From England, I believe, and we'll get to talk a little bit more about it. But Charles Henry, who was born a slave, his mother was Kitty Ann, the best I can find. He married Mary Elizabeth Bradford, and we could not find out anything about her. But the next set of information that I did discover is that he was married in St. Lucie's Parish Church in the presence of Samuel Paris Bradford and Mary Elvira ONeill. Both were 30 years old at the time of marriage. He lived at Sunset, and she was from husbands. So was her brother Samuel Paris, who was a witness. Where did I get this information from? It's the devil in the details. You know, I got up this day and I says, there's got to be a marriage certificate someplace. And guess what? The marriage certificate. This is the lineage, is a connection between the Bradfords and the St. John's. Charles St. John, who had a child with Kitty Ann, the slave woman, produced Charles Henry St. John, who married Mary Elizabeth Bradford. The last child, Fitz Albert Augustus St. John, married Edith Fitzgerald Stroud. These are the Strouds from Strouds Bay, St. Lucie. And of course, their son, Edward Gilbert St. John, married my mother, Alice Alma St. John. And here you have Liz Thomas there, right? Now, on the opposite side, Mary Elizabeth Bradford, Edward Bradford, marries Susan Skinner. That is a story all unto itself. But there were 3 children, Samuel Paris Bradford, Mary Elizabeth Bradford, and John Richard Bradford. Now, John's family is extremely prolific. All the Bradfords that you know are connected to him. So you Now, this is only a synopsis of what you see here. You've got to understand there are hundreds involved here, okay? But I wanted to give you the line to Joan. She's one of our family members, and it was Joan and Mary who gave me the hint who Mary Elizabeth Bradford was. Now, as long as I got her brother, then I started to focus on Mary Elizabeth more. So after getting the marriage certificate, I was able to find out all the details associated with these Bradfords. And in this one, this is a marriage record. Hopefully you can read this. But this is a marriage record between Charles Henry St. John and Mary Elizabeth Bradford. And what you learn from it is that both of them were 30 years old. And that her father was a fisherman. Now, the information I got originally from Joan and her sister was that he was from Riverbed. But consequently, all the information I've ever found said he's from Husbands, St. Lucie. And this is showing in every record that I got, I found out that he was a fisherman. And you see Charles Henry up here is showing on his marriage certificate that Charles St. John the Planter is his father. Now, we have concurrent information about this because I have Charles's will. And in that will, he describes Charles Henry as his, he didn't specifically say he was his son, he's my son, but he says that he shall be clothed, etc., etc. All right? So we know from osmosis that it is his son. Now, the same thing actually is generally true because he gave him a stipend, or he gave him money when he reached the age of understanding. That was the age in Barbados at the time, so he knew he was started. But you notice that Charles Henry lived in Sunset, and he was a shopkeeper. Now, in previous research, I had learned that he was a shopkeeper in what you call now Moontown, or Half Moon Fort. All right? But these are all St. Lucie people. And if you know where Husbands is in the, next to Checker Hall. And Sunset is a little bit further on beyond, you know it probably by Catch 22. That's in Sunset, for those who want to know geographically where it is. And the relationship between where the church is, St. Lucie's Church, and Bentham's, because Bentham's was built by Charles Henry St. John. All right? And his son, I gave a speech on him from St. Lucie earlier in one of the bus tours, where we know he was one of the first people that introduced steam generation to plantations for grinding sugar. And I think one of the ward ladies is sitting back here. She touched a bit on the Brathwaites. So here is what, how this is configured, and the two signatures in there, and you'll see Samuel Paris. And you need to know from previously the ONeills. So there are families that were well connected at this time. The ONeills were tied to the Barrows and so on. Now, that's a whole different research project to go on, because as a young man growing up, my family took me to all the various family members you're talking here. We went to the Skinners at Checker Hall. You know, they've got to be connected back to the other Skinners, right? Because they're all associated with each other. The ONeills were all together because I did a lot of the processing for payroll for pensioners in the post office. So I'm old enough to hear a lot of the stories from my family. Okay? Now this one is the marriage of John Richard Bradford. Now, John Richard is the he's the lineage of Joan here. And here in the family tree, which I do have a very extensive portion of the family tree that we put together. And you'll see again that Edward Bradford, the fisherman. So the fisherman is tying all the Bradfords together and where they live, husbands. Okay? So it's important to find the devil in the details, is what I'm saying. You have to have, you know, you go on Ancestry and you pick up the RL number, oh yes, this part, but it doesn't really tell you the whole story. So you spend hours. Just imagine this is only one node. I call it the roundabout. You know, you go in a roundabout and you have 3 and 4 sections you can go off on. So what you have to do is you have to pick very carefully in your research. You have to say, well, do I really want to know about that particular part of the family or not? Right? What do I want to know about the Bradfords? Is because I had an integral part of my livelihood around all the Bradford boys, whether they're in St. Andrew or whether they were at Bentham's. And by the way, we all meet up at funerals, right? That's the thing. So this one is the marriage of, this is Samuel Paris, right? And again, he's from Husbands. This is the other brother, right? So I wanted to kind of go through this quickly and make sure my time is right. I thought it would be interesting. So this one finishes up the details about Mary Elizabeth Bradford. So we know where she was, who she was, when she married, and so on, and when she died. All right? And she's buried in the St. John grave at St. Lucy's Church. All right? Now, that's what we call a node. All right? Now, I'm going to continue on to tell you a little bit more about nodes, and this is moving on into a different area altogether. But before I go there, I said the devil is the details. You have to have the backup information for your conclusions. And this is one of them. This shows the death of Mary Elizabeth Bradford, right, and where it is. I kind of highlighted it in here, and of course you have the records, and this goes into your database. Okay, now this is the St. John's, and this you can't see part of it up there, but it says Y-DNA. All right, we get back around to nodes again, or that roundabout. Who was involved with who? Now, why I specifically say Y-DNA is the Y-DNA is people who have taken their DNA and established where the lineages are. So we did a paper trail. So how do you know exactly whether they're for real or not? Okay. So this is an example of the same issue. Now, what you're looking at here, you draw your conclusions to on the right circle. It says Charles Henry St. John and Mary Elizabeth Bradford. That group, we consider that a node. All right. And from that node, I'm only showing two in here for reference because the line at the bottom says Match DNA Test Group 2019. All right. So what I'm showing you in here, all the people that had matches to me. Okay? I'm Tom over there on the right-hand side. So my lineage, paper lineage, goes to Fitzalbert, to Edward, my father, to me. All right? I'm not showing the additional brothers or the other people involved. Kenneth, the same thing with Kenneth. He's my father's brother. And there's a John down there that's family to him. And what we do is we get relationships. So Fitzalbert is a node or traffic circle, right? Above him, Charles Henry is another one, all right? So Alex, in order to be family to me, through that chain, he had to go through Charles Henry in order to match me. It's like driving in a traffic circle, all right? And in order to get to Charles St. John, the planter, look what had to happen. Now, this is a recent occurrence. I've had two people, Patrick and CL. CL, you have to understand, people get very touchy when it comes to DNA, all right? So this tells you that there are two sisters somehow, that are connected to a node of Charlotte St. John and Jonas Wilkinson, who was the sister of Charles St. John, who had the kid from Kitty Ann. And that flowed back up to Francis, believe it or not. This is the Y-DNA portion of it. So at the bottom, each one of those has a certain percentage that says how much relationship you are to those. So as an engineer, you think about this like a simultaneous equation. Remember that word, simultaneous equation, right? For bits in here, those who did algebra, where you have, you can create a circle between each one of those and solve it, the equation. And that's what Ancestry does. And we'll show you that in the next slide. Okay? So this is on the mitochondrial side of the DNA. This is my mother's side. Now remember, Y-DNA is a straightforward, a single line. Think about it as DC, right? DC. And mitochondria like AC, which is alternating. You have both male and female portions inside of it. But this tells you an idea of, you can see my two mother sisters, we're matched up, and we have a node with Agnes. And this is the dashes, William Benjamin Dash, and there is like 30 sets of dashes in here, right? We've given some more information about this earlier by a previous presenter, Leon Dash, which I'm related to, and there's a number associated with how he got related to me. But his relationship comes through William Benjamin Dash's brother, right? So this thing is quite large. So what I want to show you now is what it looks like on Ancestry. These are the physical information of where Thomas is and all those people that match. All right? On the left-hand side is a different company, and some of you may have used other companies, and you will find out that, like for example, the family tree DNA has a different match, but I found that out, and you can have your own also. This is for my mother, the same one, the ones that matching. And of course, I want to bring you an idea up there where you talk about the center mounds, where that's the percentage that's associated to each person. But as compared to my brother's daughter is 1,614 compared to some of the other ones down there of only 12 or 32. So think about it like a stream. Okay, so this one is my mother, and this one just tells you about where you're going to go get all of the information from the various DNA companies that will do this. Thank you very much for your presentation and being here with me.
Thank you very much, Tom.
One last thing I would like to say. I did prepare a document for Joan, and I'm going to give this to Joan.
Thank you.
Right? It's the front part of the presentation plus the actual DNA. So if you don't mind.
Okay, would you like Joan to come forward?
Yes, thank you.
Would you like to come forward, please, Joan Bradford?
The next one.
As I said, there will be some questions on this, I think. Circles, I prefer to algebra personally. I don't know about
Okay,
other
Joan,
people.
so this
but
is it.
in the
And
meantime...
in the back side, you have everything, and then you actually have the tree in the back. Okay.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Well, yes, that was really nice. I think it's really nice when we find connections like this. And then we have a third speaker before we get on to the questions. And so far, I have to say, the previous speakers have been very good at timekeeping. So, Marcia, you are the next person to come along and see if you can match up to them, because it's been really interesting in every way, and I'm sure your information is too. Thank you. How do we? No, we need to get rid of this. Should we just switch it off? Only technology people know how to get rid of it.
Can't hear you.
You're actually using... You need it. No, it's Harriet. No. Can we have a technology person, please? She's here. Are we sorted?
Good evening. Sorry for that delay. No, not at me, sorry. Sarah Mercy's Familiar and Social Connections, 1817 to 1846, a dedication to my enslaved ancestors of St. Joseph. I need a slide to go forward. Okay. In order to introduce my ancestors, I'm going to read first from the introductory paragraph of this book, The Politics of Reproduction, Race, Medicine, and Fertility in the Age of Abolition by Catherine Poe. It will set the scene for the introduction of my ancestors. In the 1791, the British abolitionist and Member of Parliament, William Wilberforce, spoke on the floor of the House of Commons in support of his motion for the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade. He acknowledged that many parliamentarians believed that ending the slave trade would cause economic ruin for the West Indian colonies by depleting the plantation labor force. He insisted, however, that once the trade was abolished, the labor force would be maintained because, in his words, managers would henceforth be forced to make breeding the prime object of their attention. Enslaved populations in the British West Indies had been lagging for decades, and the War of American Independence had caused disruptions to the Atlantic slave trade that demonstrated that West Indian planters could no longer rely on importing enslaved Africans to meet their labor needs. Wilberforce saw the abolition of the slave trade as a means to an end, the stabilization of the British imperial economy. By cutting off the supply of laborers to West Indian planters and plantations, he believed that British legislators could force planters to focus on rearing up a homegrown labor force. Wilberforce's comments suggest a number of questions. What did abolitionists mean when they described breeding as one of their goals? What was the relationship between abolitionism and the drive to sustain the West Indian plantation labor force? How did that drive intersect with evolving ideas about fertility, sexuality, demography, and disease? What implications did the emergence of policies designed to promote fertility have for the political and economic history of the British West Indies and Atlantic world? How did these policies play out in the lives of enslaved Afro-Caribbean women? This book will focus on these questions, and this presentation will give you a glimpse of my 9 enslaved ancestors, 1817 to 1834, declared on the slave registers of St. Joseph. Now, on the registers, which I have examined and transferred onto this Excel spreadsheet, I'm introducing you to my great-great-great-grandmother, who in 1817 appears on her first legal record as 14 years old, and her name was spelled by the enumerator who was taking the material as Sary Massey, S-A-R-Y-M-A-F-S-Y. That was her enslaved name in 1817. She's furthermore described as a black house servant. The registers are chronologically done every 3 years, so the next register in 1820, she's registered there as now 17 years old. In 1823, between 1820 and 1823, she's given birth to Mary, who is described on the register as black, 2 years old, and she's also described as an increase. She's also given birth to Charlotte, who's 7 months old, who's described as an increase. Between 1823 and 1826, she gives birth to Thomas, who's described as colored. 1 year, 3 months is his age, because he also dies when this enumeration is done. He's already dead, so they give his age as an increase at 15 months and a decrease. He's also described as a decrease. Between 1826 and 1829, she gives birth to Dorothy, who is colored, 1 year old, 10 months, an increase. And John Richard, she also gives birth to John Richard, colored, 2 months, an increase. By 1832, she gives birth to Francis Hanley, who is described as black, 1 year, 4 months, an increase. And Sam Thornhill, who is described as black, 1 month old, an increase. During 1829 to 1832, Charlotte Ann and John Richard die, and they're therefore recorded as decreases. Now, they died in 1831 because next to their names on the registers it says death due to hurricane. So they died in that tremendous hurricane of 1831, which is a hurricane similar to the one that recently has been experienced in the Bahamas. You can read Robert Schomburg's History of Barbados to get details on that. So 2 children are recorded dead as decreases. In 1834, she gives birth to John Hunter, and he's born just around the time that the British enumerator is doing this register in St. Joseph. So they do not describe what color he is. I guess they're waiting. He's just born, and he's considered to be an increase. This is an actual image of the St. Joseph Register, and you can read the heading there, and where the arrow points is where the heading is. And I am going to read now a paragraph from chapter 5, which moves us forward into this period. As abolitionism gained steam in Great Britain during the early 19th century, the lure of a self-sustaining labor force and its consequent economic benefits continued to lead British politicians down the path toward reform, providing crucial motivation for the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade in 1807. Even after the slave trade was finally abolished, Britons concerned with the future of the plantation system continued to fret over Afro-Caribbean reproduction and to engage in careful calculations about the most economically efficient methods for encouraging childbearing. The creation of a registry system, which you're looking at now, is the pages in St. Joseph's book, to track the numbers of the enslaved during the 1810s, the legal endorsement of the Afro-Caribbean marriage in the 1820s, and the initiation of a period of apprenticeship that was designed to promote civilized Moors and subsequent reproduction can all be attributed, at least in part, to the driving concern to sustain plantation labor. Now, you will say that Charlotte Nesfield is not a plantation owner, but persons like Charlotte Nesfield and individuals across Barbados owned enslaved persons, and their focus to multiply their enslaved people was because they could rent them to nearby plantations. And you'll see this all unfold as we go along. They could rent their slaves to work as grass pickers, children between 3 to 6, and they could also rent them to work in the cane fields. And of course, with the females, they could rent them for several things, including prostitution. Now, Charlotte Nesfield and George Hunter Turney. George Hunter Turney is the legal representative of Charlotte Nesfield on all of the registers between 1817 to 1834 that document my great-great-grandmother and my great-uncles and aunts. Now, these are the baptism records. They're all available on familysearch.org. And suddenly in 1825, Charlotte Nesfield and George Hunter Turney make a decision that 3 of the children should be baptized. And 1825 is a very critical year in the history of Barbados. I'm not going to go into that now. You can look that up for yourself. But Mary Elizabeth, Charlotte, Anne, and Thomas are suddenly baptized in 1825, and from there on, there are baptism records existing for all of those children that you saw. And the baptism records record them with only their names. There would be no surname because no enslaved person had a surname at this point in time. And the baptism records all say that they're slaves of Charlotte Nesfield. And it gives their mother's name as Sarah Mercy. Some of the records also indicate that they're living near Lamins. So Lamins would be the critical plantation near to where Charlotte Nesfield is living and owning Sarah Mercy and her children. Now suddenly in 1834, 4 days before emancipation, Charlotte Nesfield and George Hunter Turney make a decision to have the mother of those enslaved persons baptized. And 4 days before emancipation, she's baptized. You would notice her name had gone from S-A-R-Y, M-A-F-S-Y, to S-A-R-Y-M-E-R-C-Y, and now it's S-A-R-A-H-M-E-R-C-Y, Sarah Mercy. And to connect her to Charlotte, because this is a very important period for these enslavers to be sure that all of their persons who will be going into apprenticeship are still tied to them. And by law, they had to work on the same properties. They remained as apprenticeships. Everybody over the age of 7 remained in an apprenticeship system, whether they're owned by an individual or on a plantation. It's only children up to 6 years old who were totally free. This apprenticeship system, first of all, was to be 12 years, then it was toted to be 8 years, and then it was toted to complete in 1840. So it was very important that Charlotte, the new baptism book, the Reverend Henry Parkinson is using the new baptism book, and it no longer has a column where he can write in slaves of whoever. So he puts Nesfield as her surname, and she becomes Sarah Mercy Nesfield. They also give the abode as Turney's, and we know Turney is the surname of Mr. George Hunter Turney. So at this point, we can establish from the children's baptism records that it's near Lamins, and from this one, we can establish that Charlotte Ann actually is living somewhere on Turney's with her slave, Sarah Mercy, and her children. At this point, Sarah Mercy is 31 years old. Baptisms of enslaved persons started in this period in the 1820s. For 200 years, enslaved people were not baptized. Now, it's also come up that on the 23rd of May 1835, Sarah Mercy Nesfield marries a man called Cobino. A marriage record is created for them. And this marriage record is created in the same St. Joseph marriage book. And this also speaks to the fact that the law stipulated that the only way marriage could occur between two enslaved people, and this was also promoted because it felt it would lead to better control on reproduction, and also it might help control disease. You can read this all in the book that I mentioned at the beginning. Now, Sarah Mercy is recorded married to a man called Cobino. He was a slave of George Hunter Turney, and he took the name Cobham. He didn't take the name Turney, or the priest allocated this name Cobham to him. That is under research. It wasn't a choice of the enslaved persons. Now, in 1835, they have a son. In May 1837, they have a son, and 1838. And the father, Cobino Cobham, is described as an apprentice laborer on all of those records. And their mother is described as Sarah Mercy Cobham. Now, the couple's second son, they named Cobina after his father. And in June 1840, the baptism record of their daughter, Rebecca Malvina Cobham, describes her father as the sexton of St. Joseph Parish Church. So previous to that, he was described as an apprentice laborer, and I want you to remember that because all of this plays a part in what is going to unfold. Now, what is also interesting is that in this marriage book, neither Cobina Cobham or Sarah Mercy Nesfield signed. They put an X, the mark of Cobina Cobham, and the mark of Sarah Mercy Nesfield. However, also the people who could write their names, the priest writes everything. So this handwriting is everything. Even where they had another marriage on the opposite page where the persons are supposed to have written in their names, is the priest's handwriting. So that's also very interesting to note, and the priest was Reverend Henry Parkinson. Now, George Hunter Turney would need examination because I knew that he would tell us more about my great-great-grandmother. In 1836, he wrote a will, April the 14th. He was compensated on May 1836, the 9th of May, and his will was probated on the 26th of September, so we know he died between April and September. Now, on the 1834 registers of George Hunter Turney, he had declared that he owned 2 enslaved persons. He owned John Thomas, who was 36 years old, colored, Barbadian, and he owned Cabina, who was 44 years, black Barbadian, in 1834. And if you were here or you want to know more about them, that's in the 15th of May lecture, which I delivered for the museum right here. Now, George Hunter Turney received 58 pounds, 5 shillings and 2 pence for his 2 enslaved persons, but now you understand that how Cabina and Sarah Mercy came to be married. And John Thomas and Cabina actually were enslaved by Lucretia Turney in St. Michael, and George Hunter Turney bought John Thomas from his relative Lucretia Turney back in 1826. And in 1829, when Lucretia Turney dies, George Hunter Turney becomes his legal representative and indicates that he was gifted Cabina. So he brings Cabina between 1829 and 1830 into St. Joseph to live as his slave. Now, George Hunter Turney's will, we don't need to worry about everything in it. We just like to look at the highlighted areas. It reconfirmed that he was in St. Joseph when he died and when he wrote the will and he died. And it goes on to say that he bequeathed unto my friends, Miss Charlotte Nesfield and Miss Mary Messiah, the free use of 1 acre of land north of his dwelling house. So now we know that Charlotte Nesfield lives on 1 acre of land belonging to George Hunter Turney, and we know from Charlotte Nesfield's slave baptism, the baptism she has for her slaves, that is near Lamins, and we know it's in St. Joseph. It goes on to say that the remainder of the land for and during the term of her natural life, Elizabeth Rebecca Turney, his wife, is to remain on that land for the rest of her life, and that at her death, the land is to be sold and divided among his sons. Now, the land that is in total that the wife lives on is 4.5 acres, so add that to the acre. So we know the plot of land is 5.5 acres that John Hunter Turney lives on. And that, in fact, says something about him, but we won't go there tonight, and how he would possibly have got that land. His sons, Cheeseman Moe Turney, William Messiah Turney, George Hunter Turney, and John Nesfield Turney, and Joseph Smith Turney are named. And should Rebecca, his wife, die, when Elizabeth Rebecca, his wife, dies, he says in his will that he wants the land sold and the money should be divided equally among his sons. So we can see the picture for Sarah Mercy here and her children who are enslaved by Charlotte Nesfield, living on 1 acre of this 5.5 acres. You can picture her in our minds in her shack. Now, Charlotte Nesfield dies 1 year after George Hunter Turney, and her burial record of 1837 says that she lives near Clement Rock. So we know that this 5.5 acres is near Clement Rock, it's near Lamins Plantation, and it's in St. Joseph. This is the devil in the details, as Thomas said. Now, there's been no compensation record online yet for the monies paid to Charlotte Nesfield, but I can assure you that I've done an analysis of her will, so I'm on to what happened there, but we're not going to go there tonight. Our interest is in Sarah Mercy, my great-great-great-grandmother. And her will, Charlotte Nesfield's will, she had somebody write it for her, apparently, in 1837, because it has X, mark of Charlotte Nesfield, and a seal. So this indicates that she was illiterate. Now, in Charlotte Nesfield's will, it says that I also give and bequest, that's what's in the will, unto the said Elizabeth Rebecca Turney the remaining term of apprenticeship of my laborers, namely Sarah Mercy, Mary Elizabeth, and Dorothy, for and during their said servitude, and in the event of the death of the said Elizabeth Rebecca Turney, Then the said services of the said laborers to be to and for her children, namely Cheeseman Moe Turney, William Messiah Turney, George Hunter Turney, John Nesfield Turney, and Joseph Smith Turney. Now, that sentence is loaded. First of all, this is 1837. Sarah Mercy is Sarah Mercy Cobham. She's a married woman. The person writing this will has no respect for the fact that Sarah Mercy is Sarah Mercy Cobham. They call her by Sarah Mercy, which is the name they used when she was enslaved. She's also now stated as a laborer, and under the laws, the British laws, which were here, the British laws applied here in colonial Barbados, to name her as a laborer at this point means that she would be in apprenticeship until 1840. Because laborers would be in apprenticeship to 1840, the first rules came out, and domestics would be only in apprenticeship to 1838. And she was always called a domestic on the other records. So by naming her as a laborer, they're tying her to the Turney land and to the Turney family until 1840. This is 1837. No one would know that the apprenticeship is going to come to a screeching halt in 1838 for several reasons, including the agitation of the persons under apprenticeship. The other point to notice here is that you can understand the social implications for Sarah Mercy, who is now 34 years old. Her teenage daughter, Mary Elizabeth, will be 16 years old because she was 13 in 1834 in the registers. And her daughter, Dorothy, would be 10 years old here at 1837. So you see the picture, what's happening on this 5.5 acres of land. Now, out of curiosity, I wanted to know what would be the ages of these 5 sons at 1837. And you can see clearly the first son would have been 24, the second son 17, the third son 15 years old, the fourth son 13, and the last son would have been 7 years old in 1837 when Charlotte Nesfield's will was written. Now, Elizabeth Rebecca Turney, in fact, died, the widow of George Hunter Turney, died in 1842, and on her record it says near Lamins, St. Joseph. Apprenticeship came to a screeching halt in 1838. Now, we're not going to look at all of the details. The highlighted area is the area that we need to look at. And here, the reason I've examined these boys so closely is because I needed to know, I wanted to find out if any of their baptism records would indicate to me what was their father's profession, what was the profession of George Hunter Turney. Having the middle name Hunter is also a surname in Barbados, but it could also have implications to who George Turney was and what he professionally did, and maybe what his father John did as well. But I found on the 1830 baptism record of his last son, Joseph Smith Turney, that he's described, George Hunter Turney is described in 1830 as the sexton at the St. Joseph Parish Church. So now we know that Cobina likely took over when George Hunter Turney died in 1836. But we also know that the church had indicated on the baptism records of all of Cobina's children born with Sarah Mercy, all of Sarah Mercy's children, the indication was that Cobina was an apprentice laborer between 1835 and 1838 when the children were born. So George Hunter died in 1836. So we know that Cobina is a sexton at 1840 from his daughter Rebecca Malvina's baptism record. So it seems as if he took over the job from George Hunter Turney, who passed away in 1836. Now, just a quick profile on the plantations that were nearby, because it might help you to understand why it was important for even individuals to make sure and participate in what the British government called the breeding program. On the nearby plantation of Lamins, there were 70 enslaved persons. Castle Grant plantation had 59 persons. The land was leased to somebody else. Some of the land was leased to somebody else, and that had on 69 persons, and Clement Rock had on 26 persons. So that might be giving us some circumstantial evidence of that they may have needed additional laborers, because of course there's still buying and selling going on during 1817 to 1834, but looking ahead, people knew that if they could increase their stock during apprenticeship, because they didn't know at the time it was going to stop at 1838, they'd be able to rent their enslaved people to nearby plantations to do work, or rent them in other capacities. This is just a profile of all the plantations, because my work is very expansive. Now, I also was interested in what education Sarah Mercy might have wanted for her children, and I refer to this here, and I found Kabina Cobham listed as a teacher, as well as C.M. Turney, who is Cheese Momo Turney. And I'm not going to go into any details about that, but we know that Kabina was illiterate, because at least the priest wrote he was in the baptism book. Or maybe Kabina didn't give that he could read and write. Or maybe he didn't need to read and write to teach, because what was taught in those days was really learning all of the Church of England's, what they used at their services, and being able to repeat it, the Lord's Prayer and certain passages from the Bible, and being able to repeat it. It wasn't that you were enslaved people or even apprenticeship. The children were learning to read and write, but that's another story. So an overview of Sarah Mercy Nestfield, and her 8 children born in enslavement 1817 to 1834. I'm sure you could see the physical challenges, the environmental, the racial, and the social challenges that she would have. And when I say physical, I'm speaking about emotional and spiritual as well. Now, if we look quickly, Mary Elizabeth was black, Charlotte Ann was black, Thomas was colored, Dorothy was colored, John Richard was colored, Francis Hamley was black, Sam Thornhill was black, George Hunter had no color at the time. But we can clearly see that the colored infants are all dead before the age of 2, or just when they're coming up to 2, the colored boys. And that is not unusual, because they would have been a challenge to the white sons of George Hunter Turney as they grew up. So we see that they're dead. We don't know how they died. Now, Mrs. Sarah Mercy Cobham and her 4 children, after she got married, she had 4 children between 1835 and 38, and 1838 to 40. And the first child born during the marriage, but she was married pregnant. She was recorded married pregnant, because he's born in September 1835, and she got married in May. The first child born at that point is named John Hunter Cobham, and he also dies before the age of 2. However, the first child conceived and born within the marriage is called Kabina, after his father. And then there was John Edward and Rebecca Malvina. Sarah Mercy died in 1846, as you can see, at tenement of Castle Grant. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Marcia. I think that was a very interesting way of showing how the slave registers can be used. It takes a lot of patience, and I think there's been a lot of time put into Marcia's presentation. So thank you very much. At this time, we would like to ask if anybody has any questions for Sabir, Tom, or Marcia. I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this. I wonder if we could possibly bring chairs to the front, and then it's easy for you to answer any questions. Sabir? It's all right. You can have this chair. No, it's all right. You can have this chair. There was one there already.
Sure, you can bring my chair.
No, sit down. No. So, do we have anybody who'd like to ask a question? Please, Mr. Cox, did I see your hand go up? Do you like to come to the microphone?
My question is to Marcia.
It is clear. It's clear based on the registers of 1817 to 1834 that Sarah Mercy conceived children with black men or a black man, and with white men or a white man, because she is black and she has three children described before 1834 as colored. So they could only be described as colored if their father is white. And I can't say who that man is, but we are very clear that she lived on the land, on an acre of land, which was owned by a man called George Hunter Turney. And we're also very clear that by 1837, the oldest son was 24 years old. I cannot say who the fathers of those children are. I can say that Samuel Thornhill, who was born in 1832, circumstantial evidence would show that his father is likely an enslaved man called Samuel Thornhill, who was enslaved on Blackman's plantation and who was 29 years old at 1834. Now, after Sarah, I've also done research on all of those children to see what surnames they took. And so far, Dorothy took her stepfather's name, Cobham. So did Frances Hanley. She took her stepfather's name, Cobham, because Cobina is her stepfather. And based on the records that are available, Cobina is her stepfather. And also, Samuel Thornhill took the surname Cobham. So we cannot say that Cobina is blood related to any of those children. Cobina was enslaved by Lucretia Turney and lived in St. Michael. He was brought to St. Joseph by George Hunter Turney, who received him as a gift by the dying Lucretia. So I cannot say who the fathers of those children are. I can only speak to the situation regarding Samuel Thornhill with some certainty based on the circumstantial evidence that the only person in proximity to Sarah Mercy at 1832 who carries the name Samuel Thornhill is an enslaved man of 29 years old on Blackman's plantation. And he's likely the father of Samuel Thornhill, Sam Thornhill.
The fact that Cobina lived in St. Michael does not rule out the possibility that he could have visited St. Joseph.
It's very important when you're doing this level of research and creating credibility that you make no assumptions of blood lineage like that. You have to have the proof to say, I can do circumstantial evidence surrounding Samuel Thornhill because of the enslaved man with the infant Samuel Thornhill born in 1832. There's also an enslaved man at Blackman's in proximity to Sarah Mercy called Samuel Thornhill, who's also in St. Joseph at Blackman's plantation. But it would not be fitting for me to indicate who I can't say who the other fathers are, and I can't name Cobina as the father because I can only say that he married Sarah Mercy, and I can see good reasoning why George Hunter Turney and Charlotte Nesfield would have wanted Cobina and Sarah Mercy to be recorded in the marriage book of St. Joseph as a married couple. The law also stipulated, the British law also stipulated that for two enslaved people to marry, because suddenly marriage was now available to enslaved people from around 1825. It was not before. It was very important that that occurred because, and they had to give permission. The owners had to give permission was one thing that was stated, and the second thing is that the male and female who were to be placed in the marriage books as being married had to be living on the same land. And I encourage you to read this book because it's extensive research. It's an Oxford printed press book, and there's extensive data in here that speaks to everything I said just now about the laws with regards to marriage of enslaved persons, and it was seen as a method of keeping a male and a female together to reproduce for labor. It wasn't seen as that's what it was seen as a need by the owners of enslaved persons, both privately and on plantations.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to actually walk around and give people the microphone for the next questions, because I'm afraid it was an interesting question, Mr. Cox, but we couldn't. I don't think everybody could hear you, but at least we got a very interesting answer. So, are there any more questions that anybody would like to ask? Or would anybody like to share any similar experiences that they've had with any of these speakers presently?
I don't remember your name.
Sabir.
Sabir.
Yeah. Why did you came to Barbados at night? You came to Barbados at night. What brought you to Barbados?
My dad was here.
Yeah, but
He came
he
before.
decided to migrate to Barbados.
My dad migrated to Barbados, and then he called me first. And then my mom and my other brother came afterwards. The arrival of these Indians in Barbados is really different from those in Trinidad, Guyana, because as you know, they came as indentured laborers in 1838 in Guyana and 1845 in Trinidad and so on. In Barbados, these Indians came on their own, and they came accidentally. So my dad also, he went to England and he worked in the coal mine, and he got fed up with the coal, and then somebody told him, man, I'm going to Barbados to my friend. So my dad said, well, why don't you ask your friend if he can come along with you? And he wrote a letter and asked his friend, can my friend Ismail Nakula come with me? He said, of course, sure. And so therefore my dad arrived in 1953. Honestly, I'm so happy he came to Barbados. But recently I was in England on my way from India, and it was cold, rainy, and such a miserable place. So all of these Indians in Barbados came, unlike the indentured laborers, came on their own, and they came accidentally.
Thank you very much, Shabir. Anybody else who would like to contribute in any way?
Marcy, thank you very much for your presentation. I want to ask the question, on the 31st of July, my understanding is that the Glasgow University, in collaboration with the University of West Indies, has signed a memorandum of understanding for the research towards reparation. My question to you is, have you made any advance towards Professor Hilibertos as expressing an interest in the research that will be ongoing towards reparation based on your work? Have you begun to see yourself as part of that process?
Me?
This year I was 63 years old, and my father had me at 65. So nothing is impossible. I haven't made any approaches. I'm aware of the money allocated for research. I understand it is doctoral research. Nothing is impossible, Mr. Barrier. Thank you for the question. Meanwhile, I am collecting all my data, extensive amount of data, and this is my maternal side, I had 2 more slides to show you, but I knew time was running out. Just 2 slides, because I know there are people here who do not understand how the next step in the phase and my association with this, with Sarah Mercy is explained in those last 3 slides. But believe you me, I have all the research, so much research, and I'm also doing my father's side. Sarah Mercy is on my mother's side.
Thank you, Marcia. Anybody else who'd like to share?
I would like to ask Mr. St. John a question relating to the present Bernard St. John and Anne St. John and all that family that live in Christchurch, the St. John family, and then to find out whether the graphic from Black Rock is literary fiction. I don't know much about the graphics we but to give you an overview of the St. John's, remember Charles Henry St. John? Charles had a son, Charles Wilkinson St. John, and actually he lived in the corner of Chapman Street and what's that road going on there? Baxter's Road, right? He actually lived at that point. And he had a number of sons. One of those sons was Herbert St. John, actually Dr. Herbert St. John. He was an eye specialist here in Barbados. And he lived in Barbers Hill. And his brother lived at the other corner. He was also a doctor. He was Sidney St. John. But he had 2 other sons, of which 2 brothers married 2 Austins. This is a very extensive family in Barbados. They're from St. John's and Malvern and that group. One of those brothers' lineage from the Austin clan had Bernard St. John, and we call him Bree, and Eric, and there's 2 girls involved. So that's the lineage there. And the other brother who married the other sister, you get Dr. William St. John. Oh, by the way, Bree's brother is Noel St. John. He was also an eye specialist. His name was Dr. Noel St. John. And these St. John's like the cluster around. They had all the offices in Pinfold Street. Actually, there is a doctor in William's old office currently. His brother, Arthur St. John, he had he was an optometrist. And his business is still there. Is part of an optical house also. And Anne is the daughter of Noel St. John. That is, she's actually Margaret. So Anne St. John is very close to me. I'm a bit older than her, but she specialized in a different area. But we were looking at St. John clan as doing some research, and I was going to give Anne the opportunity at one of these meetings to present why there's so many doctors in the St. John family. Actually, it goes, remember I told you about Wilkinson, Dr. Charles Wilkinson? Well, he had another brother, Thomas St. John. And these are two doctors. Their father was a slave. And he was the first black doctor to graduate from Boston University in 1885. So you figure that one out. St. Lucie must have had something in the water. I think they attended the parish school, which was under the auspices at the time of the church, Parry himself, who was the Bishop of Barbados.
I think I gave a presentation on this once on the bus store. So St. Lucie actually produced quite a lot of well-known people. I kind of touched a little bit on some of the families that were down there, including the Barrows and the ONeills and whatnot. Then there's a whole history, but that was and the Skinners. I know this even as a young kid growing up. My father took me to these places. I fell in love with some of the Skinner girls. You know, some people know about them. They were nurses. And I ended up finding them in New York and everywhere all around the place. So, yes, that's the extended family of the St. John's. It's quite detailed. And you see from one of the slides I had in there, you see there was another Charles St. John up there who married Christie. And that connection was a very important note because it says that that's where all the other St. John's came from. And there are lots of stories associated with him because he lived at Content, which was just about St. Thomas's Church. And there are a lot of manumitted records of slaves where he paid a lot of money to the vestry to free them as well. So it kind of gives you a little idea of what was going on in the family. But I must say the Bradfords were very, very close to us. And we grew up together, we played together. As a matter of fact, one of the Bradfords in Baxter's, Lyle was his name, to show you how close this was in doing the research and delving into the details. I was trying to track down my grandmother, who was Stroud, and I'd come to find out that I pulled her death record to find out more details about her. And what I discovered was that she died in St. Andrew, of all places. How did St. Lucie get to St. Andrew? Well, that happened because her son, Walter St. John, was the headmaster of the Allen School. And so they gave her residency as the Allen School. But what is more interesting as the family group, there are usually signatures to a death certificate. You wouldn't guess who the death certificate people were. Lyle Bradford and John Smith. Some of you might know who John Smith was. He was the principal of the parish school. So education was always in the Bradford vein. And John can attest to this throughout, and all the Bradfords that lived in Mile and a Quarter. And my very uncle married his cousin. Did he know that his cousin was his family? I mean, his cousin was related to her? I don't know. Right? But all the Bradfords in Mile and a Quarter, we grew up as children, interacted with them, and so on. So, yes, I'm not sure exactly, but, you know, Jones brothers, Camus, Bradford, and the whole, there are so many of them, you know, you can't count them, right? So, from Blackrock, I'm not quite sure. We'll have to investigate, and Joan will have to have some other research on them. But thank you very much for your question.
Would you like to make a comment on this, Joan?
I'd just like to say that the Bradfords of Blackrock, I think, is a story. But nevertheless, when I was doing research, I found that my grandfather say was 1 of 14, and his father then was 1 of 14 too. So, you know, the Bradfords is a very sensitive family. Okay? And you mentioned my brother Cameron Bradford. We also have Craig Bradford, the cricketer. Roy Bradford, you know, they're very known around the place. But the thing about the St. John, when I was doing the research, I knew Tom ever since, but I knew him to say that his uncle was married to my aunt. Uncle Kenneth and Aunt Edith.
Right, yes.
So I just knew that. But then he told me, but no, I've been doing some research, and there was a boy Bradford, my
scoutmaster called Mr. Bradford, who did live in Rock. They were all over the place. Thank you. Right, do we have anybody else who would like to make a comment? I know we have one person who'd just like to make a quick presentation, when we finish with the comments, but I don't want to draw things to a close.
Any comments on the strokes? Any comments on the strokes? Were there?
Yeah, so. The Strokes were from St. Peter originally, and this is going to go towards Christchurch. He's a young man. The Strokes lived in Maxwell. My Aunt Iris, we call her Iris, and Eddie, who is my grandmother's sister, lived in Maxwell. But they all came out of Scarborough. Scarborough is the house behind the post office, that big old house there. And that's where they lived originally, because one of them, Bradford Stroud, he was the, what you would call the dispenser at the aunt's house at the time. It's now a district hospital. So they were always involved in that kind of thing. All right? But the Strouds lived at a place called Iriston, of all places. Iriston, right? And currently the Hutchinsons live there. And that's another branch of the family that is currently there. There's Darby Hutchinson and Drew. You might know about them from ACAF Coffee. Right?
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Speak now, forever hold my peace, because Nicholas would like to make a brief presentation as well. Sorry.
No,
Before we go,
I don't really mind. There are also some shows in Grenada. Is there a Grenada connection?
I don't know of the Strouds in Grenada. The Strouds are a very old family. The basic research I have going back into around 1700 of the Stroud family. So, as you remember, I told you about that roundabout, right? You have to pick your battles, and you have to say, well, why did I get a DNA strike in there? Like the Brathwaites. I got a strike from a Brathwaite in Guyana, of all places, and she says, well, my great-grandfather came from Barbados. So how do I trace her? You know, how much of my energy do I expend until I find her path? As Joan rightly told you, that these Brathwaites are quite populous in the country, you know. And there's a St. Philip brand, and there's a St. Lucy brand, and the Brathwaites are married to the Wards, right? You have children, so technically stuff is going on there too, right? But she has a question.
I'm not sure if I need a microphone or not, but I was interested when you said it goes, your family goes to the Hutchinsons as well, with the ACAP, because remember when I gave the presentation, I did say that one of my grandfather's mother, my great-grandmother was a Hutchinson, one of the ACAP.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe we're all
Thank you.
thank you, Linda. Right, any more? Nicholas, I understand you'd like to say a few words. So thank you, our presenters. We will be thanking you more formally in a few minutes. But first of all, Nicholas would like to say something. Right, okay, I have no idea. Harry and this.
See if it's on the chair. Computer.
I don't know if you want to sit here and go back to wherever. It's up to you.
Yes, good night to everyone. This is just a short announcement that I'm making. I'm going to make a disclaimer. This is not an event of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, but it is an an event in collaboration with the University of the West Indies, the Barbados Department of Archives, and also Northeastern University, which is located in Boston, the USA. Okay, basically, what it is about. It is a workshop that's being held this coming Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. This is the Barbados Runaway Slave Collections project. It's taking place at the grad studies of the University of the West Indies. If persons are not familiar with this location, as you pass the Esso gas station in Black Rock, it is the first right turn as if you're going up to the archives, and as soon as you clear the incline, the hill is the first building on the right-hand side. So that is the grad studies of the University of the West Indies located in Black Rock. So that will be taking place on Friday, the 20th of September from 2 to 4 p.m. And if you are not aware, in January of this year, there was the successful completion of the digitization of one of Barbados' oldest newspaper, which is the Barbados Mercury. And this is the earliest edition that we have from April 1783. So basically, the project is the aim of the project, or what we plan to do, is to go through these newspapers to find runaway slave ads. And we are going to snake every slave ad that we come across, and we're also going to transcribe. So this is the project, and there is a website that they've created, the barbadosmercury.wordpress.com, and you can go on there to find out more about the project. And basically, there are a number of interesting ads that you can come across. So this is one that I will just show you for example, and reads, absent himself from the subscriber without any provocation whatever, a Negro man about 24 years of age by name Peter Brown. He is about 5 feet 9 inches in stature, has lost one of his front top teeth, inclined to stoop in his shoulder, and has a wife by name Sally Jones at Fort Hill in the parish of St. George, the property of Mr. Woodruff. So therefore we see interesting information which is coming forth. We see the relations that can be derived from some of these slave ads. So therefore, like some of this information, we know that in terms of the enslaved population, you may find information from slave registers, and they will not contain the name of the person's wife, as was mentioned here. So I just encourage you to come out this Friday if you can, from 2 to 4 p.m. at the grad studies of the University of the West Indies located at Black Rock. Thank you. I will now hand over to Miss Angela Skeet, and she will do the closing remarks.
Thank you, Nicholas. On behalf of the Genealogy Group of the Barbados Museum, I'd like to start by thanking our three presenters for three very interesting presentations. I think certainly the theme of the evening is connections, and you got a chance to see all the various connections play itself out. So there gave us something on the arrival of the East Indian population, and he did, I think, a good job in reminding you of some of the tips that are involved in doing family research. To Tom, I thought he did an interesting bit of information on DNA. I think you'd probably like to hear some more of that, and how you can make some very practical connections in terms of DNA. to Marcia. I think Marcia did an excellent job in demonstrating how you can mine the slave registers. Those of you who had a chance to look at those registers, they're not easy. They're no surnames. So it's not easy. So you have to do some real serious research to be able to mine those slave registers, and I thought Marcia did an excellent job on that. So I'd like to thank them for their work this evening. As usual, I would like to thank the Barbados Museum for providing these lovely surroundings for us. It's really very nice and very comfortable. We have some refreshments here, and I'd like to thank Irene Small, Linda Lewis, and Richard Odell for the refreshments which will be available to you. I would also like to, before I say anything else, remind you that the next meeting is going to be November 23rd. That's what I have here, November 23rd. Dr. Sharon Marshall is going to be speaking on solving the mystery of Major Peebles. This will be a joint meeting with the history group. Don't forget there's also another bus tour coming up. I believe Harriet will give you more information on that as we go forward. So with no more to do, what I'd like to do is to thank all the rest of you for attending this evening. These meetings are always kind of special because we get a chance to present our individual research. So thank you very much for attending, and please get home safely. And make sure, yes?
We mustn't forget to thank Bradford for her help.
Oh yes, of course. How could I forget that? for doing a lovely job in moderating and keeping it very tight and together. Oh, yeah, they were. Yes, thanks very much, Bob, for the work you did this evening. So let me invite you to participate with some of the refreshments, continue the discussion, and please get home safely. Thank you.
Before you go,
I think you stop tape and we could move.
Before you go, I want to ask in your group to do a favor to Barbados.
There is a family in England called the Gibbon family, Audrey and Gloria Gibbon, who gave birth to a twin in April 1963 called the Silent Twins. I would suggest that you, with your influence, ask the government of Barbados to invite that family to Barbados for 2020 vision. Those two children who, from the age of 3 or 4, stopped speaking to their parents and have been writing diaries from 1966 or so until 1982 when they were put in Broadmoor Mental Hospital. Google the Silent Twins and comment on the movie if Jennifer is telling her story. I have been researching that family from 1982, and I'll tell you, it's a message for Barbados. With all that we have done, there is a message in what they have written for Barbados. Thank you very much.